You were never supposed to know her name, not because she did anything wrong, but because the world has always buried what it cannot explain. She was born in silence, raised in rot, swallowed by the mountains long before her name ever reached a page. Her name was Elli Whittaker, and she did not choose to be the mother of a bloodline built on decay. She simply opened her eyes one morning in the middle of nowhere, and by the time she understood what she had inherited, it was already too late to run. Odd West Virginia is not a place on most maps, but it breathes, it groans, it remembers, and in one of its collapsed houses, beneath rusted metal and the sighs of forgotten children, lived a girl whose legacy would never let her go. The Whittakers were not just a family, they were a myth wrapped in skin, bound by bloodlines too tangled to explain. Cousins became lovers, sisters became mothers, brothers became fathers and uncles all at once. And at the center of it all stood Elli, the child who never cried, the girl who listened more than she spoke, because early on she realized that silence was the only language anyone respected in that house. There was no electricity, no plumbing, no laughter, only the gnawing rhythm of survival. 15 people in one home made of rot, one room for sleep, one pot for food, one woman, Elli, who would one day be asked to carry it all without breaking. She learned to walk before most learned to crawl, not because she wanted to, but because no one else would pick her up. She learned to cook with bones and weeds, not because she loved to feed, but because no one else remembered how to make fire. And when her siblings began to scream at shadows and bark at strangers, it was Elli who taught herself how to translate madness into mercy. She was never trained, never taught, but she became what the family needed without anyone asking, because in the Whittaker bloodline, no one survives by choice. They survive by ritual, by inheritance, by sacrifice, and Elli had been chosen the moment she was born to bleed for everyone else. She was 16 the first time she buried a body with her bare hands. There was no priest, no scripture, only silence and a shovel. Her younger brother had stopped breathing in his sleep. No one in the house noticed until the stink set in, and by then it was too late to ask for help. Not that help ever came. Not in Odd. Not for the Whittakers. Elli didn't cry. She just dragged his weight down the hill behind the shack, dug a hole with her fingers until her nails cracked, laid him down and whispered a name no one else remembered. That was how grief worked in her world. You carried it like another sibling, hungry, heavy, always watching. The neighbors didn't ask questions. They knew better. The Whittakers had become legend. Strange sounds at night, windows boarded from the inside, children who never looked you in the eye. Everyone knew, but no one wanted to know. It was easier to pretend Odd was empty, to pretend the screams were animals, to pretend Elli was just another girl and not a prisoner of something ancient and wrong. She tried once to leave, packed a bag, made it 2 miles down the mountain, and then turned back, because even freedom felt like betrayal. How could she abandon Ray, who barked at the moon, or Ruth, who still wore the same dress from childhood? They needed her. Not because they asked, but because they couldn't ask, and that was worse. By the time Elli turned 20, she had stopped using mirrors. She couldn't bear the eyes staring back. Not because they were ugly, but because they looked like all the others. Same blood, same curse, same story repeating without end. She had become her mother, and her mother before her, and the mother before that, a line of women whose names were never written, whose voices were never heard, but whose hands built the graveyard behind the house. People talk about strength like it's a virtue. In Odd, strength is a sentence. It means you live long enough to watch the others disappear. It means you remember every scream, every whimper, every limp body. Elli was strong, and because of that, she would never be free. There was a book hidden under the floorboards, its cover cracked, pages swollen with mold, but Elli read it every winter by candlelight. It wasn't a Bible. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger, a record of names scratched in crooked handwriting, all Whittakers, all buried on the land they never left. The first entry was dated 1883. The last was blank, waiting. Not for her, but for the next one to fall. She read those names like prayers, like warnings, cousins who married cousins, uncles who raised their sisters' sons as their own, babies who never saw spring, and girls whose names vanished after childbirth. The pattern was clear, but no one had the language to speak it. It wasn't science. It wasn't sin. It was something older, a loop of flesh and blood tightening with every generation. Some called it inbreeding. Others called it tradition. But Elli knew it was a cage made of names. She once asked her father why no one left. He looked at her with glassy eyes and said, "We don't leave. We are the root, and roots don't run." Then he lit a cigarette and walked into the woods. She didn't see him for 3 days. When he returned, he had dried blood on his boots and nothing to say. That was the rhythm of their world. Men wandered, women endured, boys broke early, girls broke quietly, and the strong ones, the ones like Elli, they didn't break. They carried. Her oldest brother Joseph stopped speaking at 12, started digging holes in the yard, deep ones, each day deeper than the last. He said he was digging a tunnel to heaven. No one stopped him, because sometimes madness was the only comfort they had. The world outside told stories about people like Elli, tales of deliverance, of miracles, of rescue. But in Odd, there were no heroes, only survivors. And survival came with a price. Elli paid that price every day with her silence, with her spine, with the way she held the family ledger like it was scripture, because in that rotting book she found the only truth anyone ever gave her, that this bloodline was not cursed, it was chosen to suffer, so the world could forget what suffering looked like. It was winter when the government man came, his car too clean, his shoes too soft. He knocked twice on the warped door, and Elli answered without a word. He didn't smile, didn't look her in the eyes. He just said, "We've had a report," and stepped inside like the house was his to judge. He walked through the narrow hallway, his notepad twitching with each creak of the floor. He asked questions. Elli answered in short nods. She pointed when he asked about Ray, about Martha, about the one they called Silas, who hadn't spoken in years. The man didn't understand the sounds in the house, didn't know what the barking meant, didn't know why the windows were sealed with blankets. He looked at everything like it was broken. But to Elli, this was function. This was design. This was what survival looked like when the bloodline ran backward. He asked if they went to school. She said no. He asked if they saw a doctor. She said no. He asked if they had names. And she smiled, because names don't mean safety in a house like this. They mean memory. And memory is a cruel thing when you have nothing left to change. He took notes like he was building a case, but Elli knew he would do nothing, because they never do. Not really. Men like him collect data, but they don't collect people. They don't stay for the cold nights when the screaming starts. They don't carry the weight when a grown man wets himself in the corner and cries for a mother who's been dead 20 years. He left the way he came, careful, unmoved, and as the door shut, Elli bolted it with both hands, not to keep them in, but to keep the world out, because the world was not built for people like them, and they were never meant to survive inside its systems. That night, she counted the bottles of propane. She checked the pantry twice. She listened to the breath of each sibling like a doctor listens for death, and she whispered a promise under her breath, not to any god, not to any ghost, but to the blood itself I will keep you breathing, even if it kills me, even if no one ever sees me, and no one ever did. There are things you only learn in silence, things that no school could ever teach, like how to hear a scream before it comes, or how to sense a seizure in the way someone's fingers twitch. Elli learned to live like that, always half a second ahead of disaster, always anticipating the collapse. The house had no calendar, but Elli knew time in patterns. She knew which days Ray would claw at the walls, which nights Martha would cry without tears, which hours Silas would stare into the dark like it was speaking back. She knew when to hide the knives, when to open the windows for air that didn't reek of fear. She knew when to lie, to neighbors, to officials, to herself, because the truth was something they could not afford. If she told the truth, the siblings would be taken, separated, institutionalized, medicated, forgotten. They would become data in files that no one ever reads, and Elli would become just another story no one believed. So she lied with conviction, said everything was fine, said they had food, said they had care, and when no one pushed harder, she knew she had won. But winning came with a cost, because each lie carved her further from the world. Each lie made her more ghost than woman. There were nights she stood outside in the snow barefoot, letting the cold remind her she was still alive. There were mornings she looked into the cracked mirror and couldn't recognize the face looking back. Not from age, but from erosion. Because love without relief erodes the soul, and she had been loving them for decades with no return. Sometimes she imagined what another life might feel like, not a better life, just a different one, one where someone else made the coffee, where someone else remembered to check the gas, where her name meant something besides responsibility, but she never lingered in those thoughts, because the second she allowed herself to dream, one of them would scream, or fall, or choke, and she would be snapped back to duty, because dreaming was a luxury, and Elli was not raised for luxury, she was raised for endurance, and endurance has no finish line, only the next moment and the one after that, and the one after that. There are names carved into the wood of that house, not with tools, but with breath, with years, with burdens too heavy for ink, names like Ray, Martha, Silas, but none of them bore the weight that Elli did. Because Elli was not just a name, she was the lock, the key, and the door. There came a day when silence no longer protected them, when a stranger with a camera wandered up the hill, smelled the dampness in the air, heard the unnatural quiet, and saw something that the world had refused to look at for decades, a family twisted by time, held together not by blood, but by a woman with eyes too tired to shine. The footage spread like wildfire. People called it a tragedy. Some called it a horror story, but they did not understand. They saw barking, they saw confusion. They saw the symptoms, but they did not see the source. They did not see how long systems had failed, how many generations had been folded into themselves like cursed origami, until even the folds forgot where they began. Elli watched the world react with distance, with fascination, as if this was a zoo exhibit. Not her life, she heard the whispers. Why didn't anyone help? Why didn't anyone stop this? As if help had ever come without strings. As if stopping meant anything when it came 50 years too late. Still, she let them film, she let them in. Not for herself, but for the hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would care enough to bring medicine, to bring coats, to bring warmth that did not come from the body heat of 4 people sharing one mattress. But when the world moved on, when the cameras turned away, the house remained. The cracks deepened. The food ran thin again. The mail stopped again. The sky hung low and heavy again. And Elli stood exactly where she had always stood. Not bitter, not broken, but unchanged, because she never did it for attention. She never waited for applause. She simply lived, because her living meant they could live too. Now, if you follow this story this far, if you feel that knot in your chest, that pull in your gut, then I ask you to comment the phrase below twice, not just to engage, but to transform. Comment, I am the burden bearer. I am the burden bearer. Say it again. Let it become a mirror, a mantra, a marker. You are not here to observe. You are here to remember what the world tried to erase. The story of Elli Whittaker does not end in light. It does not resolve with redemption. There is no rescue, no sudden miracle, just the truth. And the truth is colder than the wind that creeps through the cracks of that forgotten house. Elli is still there, older now, slower. Her hands shake when she pours coffee. Her legs ache when she bends to clean, but she does it anyway, because Ray still screams if his breakfast is late, because Martha still hums that broken lullaby when storms roll in, because Silas still forgets who he is if she is not near to remind him. There are moments when her vision blurs, when her heart stumbles, and in those moments she is forced to face the one thing she has never spoken aloud. What happens when she is gone? Not to her, but to them, who will know how to calm Ray's episodes, who will remember that Martha needs her medicine crushed in warm applesauce, who will understand that Silas cries not because he is sad, but because he hears voices that are no longer real. No one is coming. There is no line of distant cousins waiting to take over. No foundation, no government office with a plan. There is only time, and time is a thief that takes everything, one breath at a time. Elli has prepared for this. Not with lawyers, not with money, but with routine, with systems, with scribbled instructions taped to cabinets, hoping someone might one day follow them. But even that, even the preparation, feels like betrayal because it means admitting the end is coming, and Elli has never lived in the future. Only in the now, only in the day in front of her, only in the task of survival. She never asked for this life, never chose to be the anchor of a collapsing bloodline, but she became it. Not because she was stronger, but because she refused to leave. Because when everyone else ran, she stayed. And because of that, because of her, a bloodline that should have ended in silence continued to breathe. Not beautifully, not perfectly, but with breath. And sometimes that is enough. Sometimes that is everything.